The Roaring Twenties, a time of great wealth and joy. The war to end all wars was over, and the people are happy. Nothing can slow us down. Nothing, that is, except if you were diagnosed with diabetes. If you just received that news, which many Americans did, about 8% of the population, most of whom were children, you were just told that your life was over. In the early 1920s, as it had been for many generations, a diagnosis for diabetes was a death sentence. But what exactly is diabetes? To answer that question, we go to my brother Matthew, a type 1 diabetic.
Thanks, Parker. Type 1 diabetes, or diabetes mellitus, is an autoimmune disorder where the body fights itself and kills off parts of the pancreas that produce a hormone we know as insulin. Insulin is a hormone that allows our bodies to take the sugar and carbs that we eat and turn them into energy. Without insulin, the blood becomes thick, toxic, and eventually we die. This disease has haunted humanity for a very, very long time.
Diabetes mellitus stems from Greek. Diabetes means to pass through, and mellitus meaning honey. In 1556 BC, a Greek-born physician noted that he had 2 patients with an affliction he called urinary diarrhea. They died soon after their symptoms appeared. The doctors also noted something strange about the puddles of urine left behind by their patients, and this was long before the days of running toilets. The puddles attracted flies and bees. What people back then did not know was that the urine attracted the flies and other vermin because it was loaded with sugar. Shortly after the person passed this sugary urine, the patient would become very ill, slip into a coma, and die. The affliction was commonly known as the pissing evil. There was no successful way to treat diabetes for thousands of years. Once doctors recognized the symptoms and gave the diagnosis, it was only weeks, or in a few cases, months, before the patient would die. Diabetes was a death sentence. In the late 19th century, doctors and charlatans tried different cures, but none of them actually worked. It was not until Dr. Fredrick Allen in 1919 developed what was called the Allen diet that people had treatment to believe in. The diet, which did prolong the lives of people living with diabetes, was a cure nearly as horrible as the disease.
Even when the diet was closely followed, often patients died anyway, either from what we know as ketoacidosis, which is a toxic buildup of sugar, or starvation itself. Dr. Allen knew that even though his diet worked for many, it was not a cure. The best he can offer his desperate families was to keep the child alive long enough for the medical profession to offer them something more. In 1921, that call was answered by none other than Dr. Fredrick Banting. Fredrick Banting's relentless pursuit to find a cure for type 1 diabetes gave millions of people worldwide a diagnosis rather than a death sentence. Now, who exactly is Fredrick G. Banting? Fredrick G. Banting was born on a farm on November 14, 1891, in Alliston, Ontario, Canada. He went to college at the University of Toronto to study divinity, but he later switched his focus to medicine. In 1916, he enlisted in the Canadian Army and served in France in World War I. He was wounded at the Battle of Cambria in 1918 and was awarded the Military Cross for heroism under fire in 1919. When the war ended, he returned to Toronto and used his experience from the fields of war to start a medical practice. His focus there, as it had been in the battle, was orthopedics, but he found it difficult to gain acceptance in local hospitals, and orthopedic surgeons did not generally practice in a private office back then. He held many part-time jobs at various small hospitals and at the University of Toronto. With the end of the war at hand, Banting had suspected his life would get easier and better, but that was not the case in post-war Canada. And by the fall of 1920, he found himself engaged to a woman he found it increasingly difficult to get along with, burdened with a house he could not afford, and not enough patients in his private practice to keep up with his expenses. In an effort to branch out his medical practices, he made it a habit to read all he could about all areas of medicine. On October 30th, 1921, he was reading an article he found tedious and boring, but he was determined to finish it. This determination would serve him well in his life from that point forward. In the wee hours of October 31st, 1921, only hours after finishing an article sent to him by a friend, he woke with inspiration. He jotted down in a notebook 25 words that would change medical history forever.
What Banting realized was that the pancreas's digestive juices were destroying something called the islets of Langerhans before it could be isolated. If Banting could stop the pancreas from working, but keep the islets going, he believed he would find the magical elixir he was looking for. He talked to the head Department of Physiology, Dr. John McLeod, who at first wanted nothing to do with Banting or his experiments. But after many attempts, McLeod gave in and offered Banting his lab space, 10 experimental dogs, and a medical student named Charles Best. When McLeod took off for a holiday in his homeland of Scotland in May 1921, Banting and Best started their work. In August of that year, they had conclusive results. When they gave the material extracted from the islets of Langerhans to diabetic dogs, their abnormally high blood sugars were lowered. Once McLeod came back from his holiday, he was skeptical of the results and told the team to repeat them several times. They did, and found the results were the same, but they had problems purifying their insulin extract. McLeod gave Banting a chemist named James Bertrand Collip to help purify the insulin. Collip accomplished this task in a short 6 weeks. The group decided to test it on a human, and the first one was a personal friend of Banting's. The drug was administered orally, which yielded no effect at all. Disappointed but not ready to give up, the team decided to try to inject the substance into the muscle and see if that had the desired effect. A 6-year-old boy named Teddy, who was so ill his weight had dropped less to 50 pounds, received the first injection. The injection lowered his blood sugar and cleared his urine of sugar. Teddy began to look and feel better. When insulin was introduced to the public, people thought it was a miracle. 1 year, diabetes had gone from a ruthless killing machine to a controllable disease. Estimations show that 15 million living diabetics today would have most certainly died without insulin. Banting and Best published their findings in February 1922, and in 1923, Banting and McLeod were awarded with the Nobel Prize for their discovery and shared their prize money with the entire team. Ironically, their hypothesis was not completely correct. Apparently, one can take the insulin from an intact pancreas, but no tools back then were able to prove that theory. Banting's discovery was nonetheless revolutionary. The discovery and the development of insulin was not only remarkable because it successfully treated the fatal symptoms of diabetes, but it was also on the forefront of what would be a revolution in medicine. This discovery predated the discovery of penicillin by 6 years, a vaccine for yellow fever by 12 years, and the development of a vaccine for polio by 33 years. Insulin has made living with diabetes much easier. Diabetics can now live long and relatively normal lives. But insulin is not the cure Banting and others had promised or hoped that it would be. In fact, many physicians caution that insulin is so potentially toxic that it should be treated like a poison. Too much insulin in a diabetic can easily cause what is called hypoglycemia, a condition where the blood sugars the brain needs becomes dangerously low. And if left untreated, it can lead to coma and death. There's no question that Banting's discovery is truly a turning point in history, but monumental as it was, it is not a cure.
So there's still work to do in the world of curing diabetes. Surely the Nobel Prize Committee can make room for another prize in this field, this time for a real cure.